The People's Platform.
Good evening and welcome to the People's Platform. The rapidly developing technology landscape of today poses questions on rights and responsibilities in new and urgent ways. Now, recently, the International Monetary Fund said almost 40% of jobs around the world could be affected by the rise of artificial intelligence and called on governments to establish social safety nets and offer retraining programs to counter the impact of AI. Last week, the World Economic Forum released a list of global risks for 2024. Among them are cyber insecurity, misinformation and disinformation, and adverse outcomes of AI technologies, which are in the top 10 global risks in the short term and long term. Our topic of discussion tonight is accelerating digital transformation in Sri Lanka. I'm so pleased to welcome to the studio Asela Waidyalankara. He's a cybersecurity expert and is no stranger to the show. Good evening and welcome to the show, Asela.
Thank you for having me, Sonali. Lovely to be here.
Absolutely lovely to have you with us here today. Asela, given my opening remarks, let's talk about the Sri Lankan digital landscape in terms of AI and technology adaptability and AI maturity.
Interesting question. You need to permit me to give a little bit of an explanation on that. So there has been, when you take the technology, I'll start with the technology maturity. Sri Lanka's technology maturity is industry specific. For example, there are certain industries that do have higher degree of maturity when it comes to technology, versus similarly there might be other sectors that are not. Now, an example of that perhaps is the banking sector, which is fairly technologically mature. The telco sector is another good example. Similarly, if you take maybe the agriculture sector, which is not perhaps, if you take the global benchmarks, not perhaps technologically mature as we would like it to be. So there is a bit of a scatter when it comes to technology maturity. Also, if you take the government's technology maturity, our ranking within the region as well as according to global benchmarks is we rank low to moderate in terms of our maturity. There is still certain things to be desired when we look at, in fact, automating or digitizing state sector. There are certain things to be desired.
Okay. Now, AI can both help and hurt the human workforce. What are we doing about that in terms of the state, private sector, workplaces, individuals? How are we adapting?
So this is a very interesting time. I mean, AI has really captured the general public's imagination. However, AI is not something new. AI has been in the background and has been in the works for the couple of decades now. In fact, even in your social networks, if you're using a music platform, if you're watching YouTube, the recommendation engine, everything, there's AI behind it. What happened now, perhaps with last year, 2023, is what The Economist magazine called the age of consumer AI. You had consumer-facing platforms such as ChatGPT, Midjourney that have come out and literally disrupted the consumer experience. So now everyone can have access to conversational AI, which is ChatGPT. So that has really disrupted at an individual level. So you see people using it for various reasons. You know, teachers are using it to make their study material. In fact, there are some lawyers even just to refine their briefs sometimes. They use it. And so many other use cases that are happening now with that particular use of AI. Then we have organizations. So organizations also have hopped on the bandwagon. There are two ways. One is enterprises have gone on this AI bandwagon. They've incorporated AI into their products and services. So you see traditional products and services now wrapped around with AI in front. That's one. Then you have traditional corporates basically asking IT companies or people within this space, how can we get AI to help? How can you make AI more efficient? Similarly, governments worldwide also are considering using AI. For example, the government of Japan recently is going to use a ChatGPT-like interface for public sector services. So can you imagine, it's just a chatbot, and you ask a very conversational question with regard to public sector services, and it would be able to answer. So it's wonderful in terms of citizen experience, in terms of government services or government products that government has, or e-government products. So in that sense, the experience people are going to have is going to fundamentally change, and that this technology is going to come in and really disrupt that. And I think that is where perhaps in terms of the individual, organization, and maybe even governments have to look at it.
Let's talk a bit about Sri Lanka's education system vis-a-vis employability of students, locally, regionally, internationally. Given Sri Lanka's socio-economic realities, Asela,
okay, so let me put it this way. So the sector I'm coming from, the ICT sector, right now, realistically, we do have a problem on the ground in terms of migration. There is a skill gap that's happening. Usually, we are in the IT sector, we are used to migration because it's obviously sought after industry, and certainly if people are of a certain caliber, they will migrate because they're sought after. Sri Lankans are sought after in the ICT industry globally. However, what's happening now is the pace has become more rapid, and we have different tiers of experience leaving. So you have experienced managers leaving, middle managers leaving, entry level guys leaving. So then it creates a vacuum in the organization. And then I turn to the pipeline that we have, which is our education sector. Now right now, combination of state sector, private sector, vocational training, Sonali, everyone produces about something little over 10,000 graduates a year. There's about 30,000 plus vacancies right now within the ICT industry, could be more, these are only documented. So you can understand the gap that we have to bridge. And anyone who, I mean, there have been instances where the government has also expressed willingness to position us as a tech hub. But in order for us to do that, in order for us to even attract global companies, we need to make sure that we fix this technology pipeline where we actually have graduates. We have people in STEM coming in from the system. And this particular incident is going to get worse with AI, because AI will, in fact, disrupt some of the technology related jobs as well. Now, you, for example, you may see companies like Google now have started trimming their workforce. Now, of course, there might be other economic factors behind that, recession, as well as sometimes they say they overhired in 2020 and 2021 and therefore they are right sizing now. But AI is also playing a role. And this again will have a knock-on effect on the employability of new graduates, STEM graduates coming in. So we have to make sure those graduates, as you very correctly mentioned, the employability of those graduates have to be aligned to what is out there in the market. Right, even now there is a gap. See, even now for an organization in the ICT industry, despite a student coming through perhaps a state sector university, so now it takes about a good 2 years for that person to become par in the industry. So that's an investment those organizations undertake despite the system producing a graduate. Still we have to invest. So you have to imagine now with the technology developments and all of that happening, certainly we'll have to look at recalibrating the education, the way we look at education. In fact, how we look at even learning. Because a lot of the questions people are asking now is, think of it this way, if children will have access to LLMs and AIs and ChatGPT, are we really going to tell them to study something, memorize something and write a standardized test? Is that the way to go about it? Should we not focus, in fact the World Economic Forum has commented on this also as in their Future of Work report, that creativity, out of the box problem solving, human to human interaction, those are the key things that will really be important within the next decade. So I think these recalibrations need to take place. Generally in a country every 5 years or so you do take a soul searching at the education policy. Unfortunately, I think Sri Lanka, we're a little away from that sort of planning, but certainly time has come for us to take a long, hard look at it.
Let's also talk about the need for a comprehensive compliance and regulatory framework in Sri Lanka. Now, we have the Personal Data Protection Act that was enacted in 2022, and it will be fully operationalized in March 2025. We're also looking at a cyber security bill. So, speak to us about this compliance and regulatory framework that we're looking at.
I think this is taking a cue from global development. So, in fact, in 2020, 2021, there was the term that we coined called tech clash, where the regulators felt after the incidents of Cambridge Analytica, after unchecked power that the global tech companies enjoyed, that some sort of regulation, some sort of legislation needs to be introduced at a global scale to keep them in check. So you had instances of GDPR coming into be, various countries taking the initiative to rein the tech companies in. Sri Lanka, fortunately, as I think despite some very dark legislations coming out, this is actually one of the silver linings, the Personal Data Protection Act. It was discussed for over 3 years, and it's actually in line with GDPR. Was first in Southeast Asia, in fact even India is just now trying to finalize its Data Protection Act. Thailand is in the process of doing that within the next couple of months. So where we are actually ahead of the pack for a change. Similarly, we have the cyber security bill. Now, those two legislations will be very important in terms of the technology space in Sri Lanka, because up to now there have been regulations. There was the Electronic Transaction Act, there is the Computer Crimes Act, but certainly those are a little old, and people they apply to certain instances. Here we have two regulations coming in that will apply to a larger variety of organizations, as well as if you take the Personal Data Protection Act, Sonali, it will bestow rights on individuals, data rights. So you and I will control the data that we share with organizations. Right now, it is not the case. So I'm sure you would have instances where unknown people have called you, soliciting various insurance companies or whatever. And the first question you must ask is, how did you get my number? Because you have not chosen to share the data. Of course, companies have chosen to share those data without your consent, and that's why you are getting these unsolicited messages or calls. The Act actually prevents that or curbs that kind of practice. So these are very good progressive things that are happening, because bear in mind, Sri Lanka's digital literacy, not computer literacy, with the parameters have changed now, so we call it digital literacy, somewhere in the 60%. This will continue to increase. So within the next year or two, we will hit about 70. Actually, within the urban space, it's close to about 75, 80%.
Right.
So you have highly digitally exposed citizenry without the controls legislations required, and that's where these laws will actually play a key role. Secondly, the Cybersecurity Act, organizations under the bill rather will be designed or assigned as critical national infrastructure. We call it CNIs. So for example, banks, telcos, government organizations, not related to be government sector or private sector, those organizations can be assigned under the Act as CNI. Then there is a mandate on those organizations to become more secure, to disclose breaches, to inform if there's a cybersecurity incident. Because we have seen in certain countries, it happened in Estonia, it happened in Ukraine before the hostilities broke out, where countrywide cybersecurity incidents can occur. So that's not targeting one organization. Now, for example, even in Sri Lanka, this is purely hypothetical, but if the, let's say, banking system was affected somehow, the ATM systems were affected somehow, maybe the telcos were disrupted somehow, within a day, it would be disastrous for the economy. In fact, the Fitch ratings in a non-rating related commentary had said a wide-scale cyber attack on a country will actually precipitate a debt crisis. So can you imagine for a moment, Sri Lanka, given the fragile financial status we are in right now, if something mildly close to that happens, we would still be in a lot of trouble. So I think this is why we have to be forward thinking when it comes to these legislations. It's timely. But however, not only the legislations, because usually what happens is these will just end up in the law books and no one will do much about it. there has to be a wider conversation within the society about digital rights, cybersecurity, your data rights, and so on and so forth.
If we were to speak about technology and the lacunas in law enforcement, last week I happened to watch a documentary on mass graves in Sri Lanka by a filmmaker called Ruin De Silva, where it spoke about how we don't have experts trained enough to exhume, when bodies are exhumed. What do you do with it? How do you test for DNA? So similarly, when it comes to evidence collection and other data related aspects, Asela, do we have sufficient trained officers? Do we have accredited labs? Speak to us about that whole process.
It's a very good question, and I will comment on this from this point of view. Cybercrime, and this really started to become a problem somewhere in 2020 when the lockdowns came. And globally, this was a shift where even people who are not online had to go online because the goods and services to even order stuff online, they had to use the internet. Then from there we've seen, even in Sri Lanka, the recorded cybercrime has tripled. So we have a situation where sometimes maybe the physical crime is happening, but it's facilitated in cyberspace, or maybe the crime itself is happening in cyberspace. Then it becomes a little more complicated because it's a cross-border crime. However, as this, certain type of crimes that are coming into being as cyber crimes, law enforcement also has to be equipped to handle it. Now, what I'm seeing, my observation is, unfortunately, when it comes to things such as digital evidence handling, processing the evidence, maintaining chain of custody, having accredited digital forensics labs. Now, certainly, even in India, there are several digital forensics labs, and I've seen them, and these are internationally accredited and independently audited. So, therefore, basically, the idea is that when you are presenting evidence, digital evidence, similar to medical evidence, it is irrefutable in front of a judge, and no one can question the quality of that evidence. Right now, the way we are approaching digital evidence is less than par. And what happens is we sometimes mishandle that evidence. There are instances, for example, we use certain devices without going into too much technicalities. There are devices that we use to extract, let's say if you want something out of your phone and you've done some criminal activity using your mobile phone, the way you extract the data from your phone is not merely to just plug in a thumb drive or something like that, but there are different tools that we use to do that, so that we are not introducing anything new to this device, but we are only extracting the required digital evidence from this device. And even that, you have to make a forensic copy and so on and so. So there are so much of processes involved, and unfortunately, I see a gap with Sri Lankan law enforcement when it comes to this. We need to close this gap fast, because in order for us to even seek global law enforcement collaboration or sharing of information, certainly we will have to be on par, because they would expect our evidence gathering also to be on par. Let me give you a very good example. Sri Lanka is a signatory to the Budapest Convention on cybercrime. Now, that's a global standard, global piece of legislation that we're part of, and that allows sharing of evidence between countries from Europe to America on cybercrime related activities. However, that evidence should be of a certain standing. Now, are we to say with confidence, for example, if we were to deal with the FBI tomorrow, that the evidence that we have gathered is of that standing? That is questionable. And I think that's where we need to really take a hard look at it.
So how do we bring in this standardization? Because the flip side of this is, Asela, if we don't bring in these standards, people are going to suffer, because their cases are going to be weak and it'll fail.
And prosecutions will fail. Perhaps, see, the danger is you may actually find an international cyber criminal based in Sri Lanka, and yet you cannot prosecute because your evidence is weak, or maybe because the evidence has been mishandled, the case would be thrown out. So then we lose probably that person will slip away. Plus, in the international eyes, we would have failed our collective responsibility to make sure that we bring these guys to book. So there's a lot of investment that needs to focus on this. I think we talk so much about realigning and refocusing our investments in certain sectors. This is one where we have to focus not only on personnel. Sometimes we lose that plot where we think we need more personnel, but we need personnel of certain caliber and training. For example, we need investigators who are accredited in digital forensics.
Right.
And those are people who can lead digital evidence in a court of law, who are accepted globally by their peers.
Right.
So those kind of investments need to happen, or we need to signal our intent, because there are friends Sri Lanka has, partners, donors who are willing to step forward and help us. However, we have to signal our intent in terms of strengthening our law enforcement, especially in the digital forensic space.
My final question, Asela, AI will transform the global economy, but it essentially has to benefit humanity.
Interesting question, and this is what worries me, because right now, let's look at it this way. The developments, the R&D of AI is led not by governments. They're led by private corporations. Be it OpenAI, be it Microsoft, there's so many others. Now, these are for-profit organizations. So where will they draw the line? For example, OpenAI, until very recently, had a policy of they were not going to get involved in defense contracts. They have changed it last week.
Wow.
So now, the danger is we will put AI in war machines. We will put AI in missiles. So we really have to, as a humanity, take a stance. And this is where global bodies like the UN really need to voice their opinion, as well as global leadership, be it the South or the West or anyone, needs to really voice their opinion. Developments are fine. Technology developments, including AI, is just a tool to benefit humanity. That should be the ultimate goal. However, and this is where some people are a little worried, this particular one may end it. So I'll leave you with that thought.
All right. Fantastic. Thank you for this conversation, Asela Waidyalankara, cybersecurity expert. Thank you, Asela.
Pleasure is mine. Thank you.
Thank you for watching us. We'll see you again tomorrow. Good night.